Friends, welcome back to the Decentralized Health Podcast and welcome to episode 1. And we're kicking this off with an absolute gem. This gentleman is a friend of mine. I met him when I went on my retreat to El Salvador for solar culture, and he was my roommate for that time. From that moment, we've been quantum brothers. So let me introduce you. This is Julian Frank. He's a music producer, songwriter, and media production artist based in Toronto, Canada, known for his creative and impactful work across various genres. He has collaborated with artists like Tom MacDonald, Rockafeller, Allan Rayman, Yonge, FAIZA, Pat Stevens, Tricky P, bringing unique sounds and stories to life through his media productions. Beyond music, though, Julian is a dedicated health and wellness enthusiast, athlete, podcast producer, marketing professional, and he just merges his diverse talents to inspire and educate and is genuinely a beautiful, beautiful soul. So friends, welcome to episode 1 and Julian Frank.
So I guess it sort of highlights that you get what you give, so to speak, and also explains like why people in a rough state sort of attract the things that they're fearing instead of the things that they truly want, because they don't mindfully understand this idea of manifestation.
Julian, welcome to the Decentralized Health Podcast, brother. How are you?
Doing great, Mark. Thank you for having me. It's awesome to be here.
My absolute pleasure. And thank you, one, for taking out your time to come onto this podcast. I appreciate that and I appreciate you for that. And number 2, for being my first guest. There was always going to be the one, and it was always going to be you, brother. After meeting you in El Salvador, sharing a room with you as only 2 grown-up men can share a room together, I was like, I have to get this guy on, because the knowledge you have, the experience you have, your views on life, it just needs to be shared, and the story needs to be shared with the world. So thank you for coming on. So for everybody that is listening and everybody that is watching, the Decentralized Health Podcast is exactly that. It is about all things decentralized health, quantum biology, circadian, all that type of stuff. We can even cover things like finance with like Bitcoin and all those things. So this is an open conversation. And with that in mind, Julian, let's give everybody a little bit of context, a little bit of background. Who are you? Where are you from? What do you do? The floor is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I'm from Toronto, Canada. I'm 35. I work professionally as a marketing manager at a digital agency. And I've studied media. I have a bachelor's degree in media, information, and technoculture from the University of Western Ontario. And I have a master's degree in digital media, which is a little bit more focused on startups. I'm a very passionate media producer, and I love to produce music. I love to shoot photos. I love to just do all sorts of creative things. And in a professional sense, I find that the media landscape is changing so much that it's about being a multidisciplinary, adaptive, and a high-level thinker, as opposed to just being a videographer or a photographer or anything like that. So I've sort of evolved to incorporate aspects of all the different parts of my education and my work experience. And I find creative ways to sort of bring that into my work, however that is. And, who am I or what am I in the lens of of decentralized health and wellness? That's a much more interesting question. And I don't know really what the answer is, and perhaps it'll become a little bit more clear as we continue to chat. But I am in some weird ways sort of swept up in the quantum health world and the decentralized health world, and for various reasons. So maybe we'll be able to sort of poke on that a little bit and figure out some of those reasons why.
I would love that, brother. I would love that. So when it comes to the decentralized health side of things, obviously we all start out in that centralized health system. That's where we all kind of begin, and a conversation that me and you were having before, which was like the graduation through supplementation and then navigating that kind of health economy, as you were talking about, and just making errors and redirecting your course and so on. What got you into the health side of things? Not necessarily the decentralized yet, but what got you into looking at your health in the first place? What was your health kind of handbrakes, so to speak, that was going on?
It's a good question. It almost makes me think of, I remember in middle school, a friend of mine named Matt came to class one day and he had these dog tags, just like small little dog tags that had one word on them. And he just gave them out to everybody. And the word that I got, for whatever reason, version happened to be truth. And I kept that on my keychain for a very long time. And I think that really resonated with me as a person. And I was always just broadly interested in things. And then when it came to health, it's a good question. I'm not really sure what got me into health, but I'm gonna lean into a health crisis. I'm trying to think whether this was the first thing or not. I also do want to mention that on the topic of truth, I really loved all sorts of things on the internet, whether that was, conspiracy theories, UFOs, just sort of understanding what was in this World Wide Web. And obviously at my age, I'm pretty much the first generation to kind of become an internet explorer. Remembering the days of dial-up and going on my parents' computer and all of those graduations going from Web 1.0 to Web 2.0 to Web 3.0 to where we are today, and having lived through all those changes. And then so when it came to health, I'm pretty sure I actually started listening to health and wellness podcasts before I had any real health crisis. And I don't really know what drew me to it. I think the answer is what I said at the beginning, which is this affinity or interest in truth and discovery, and maybe also just learning. But I'll also briefly just take a second now to share the health crisis that sort of sparked a little bit of this belief, not yet in the quantum, but in the decentralized health space. So to make a long story short, I was a Bluetooth earbud abuser in the 2015 era, not really knowing.
Guilty.
Yeah, not really knowing any better. I had my Jaybird X2s, which were, those were great earbuds to wear in the gym. They were lightweight, they were silicone, et cetera, et cetera. So they were really a great little device. And I ended up wearing those a lot at my downtown office job where I was working in the car sharing space as a marketing manager. Essentially what happened, and I don't know what all of it was, but I noticed that I started to get an ear infection. Maybe there was a small little scrape or a cut in my ear. I'm not really sure what caused it. But to make a long story short, I went to the doctor and he put me on antibiotics that were both oral, but also with like ear drops to deal with the ear infection. And I came back 2 weeks later and he's like, you know what, we need to put you on another round of antibiotics. And at this point, I had already known about the dangers of antibiotics and how they can wreck the microbiome and things like this. And on the second treatment of the antibiotics, things were not getting better. And my ear was in a lot of pain. It was red. It was swollen. And I made a strange personal discovery. I sort of blew my nose once and I heard whistling out of my ear. And I go, that's not supposed to happen. That doesn't sound right. That doesn't feel right. And I started thinking about what that could be. And I'm like, wait a second. I think I have a perforated eardrum. There's a blockage in the ear canal. What's going on with this? And I went back to the doctor and he's like, holy shit, you're right. Don't know how I missed that, but you're right. There is a perforation in the eardrum. And that was a real wake up call, I think, for me. The feeling was at the time that I sort of self-diagnosed the perforated eardrum that the doctor otherwise missed. And instead of really identifying the issue at its root, he just prescribed me a second round of antibiotics. This sort of created a bit of a chain reaction. So at that point, I was a little bit agitated at my doctor and also started to get the message that I would have to sort of take matters into my own hands a little bit if I wanted to ensure my recovery. This actually also led to some major problems because the first thing I started to do after I completed the course of antibiotics was look into really, really heavy duty probiotics. And this actually led me into another health crisis. So the health crisis started with the ear infection, but it was made much worse by going into the probiotic space. What I believe I did in hindsight was just totally throw off the balance of bacteria. And I started feeling like higher levels of depression, as in I like blocked my ability to produce serotonin endogenously. And that was like a real wake-up call as well, where I thought with my newfound podcast knowledge, I could just treat it with probiotics. And I learned another very valuable lesson. And I think that was one of the key events in my life that sort of woke me up to a number of different things that I just touched on, like the importance of being decentralized in your health, but also things like pitfalls of influencer marketing, certain aspects of health and wellness podcast listening, like diving all into, going straight to a heavy duty probiotic, and really not necessarily thinking about just a well-balanced diet or other things along those lines at that point. And at this point, I also had no understanding of the light environment. I was starting to understand blue blocking glasses, but I really approached it from the perspective of eye strain and being an office worker, and hadn't yet started to understand any of the relationships between, for example, getting sun on the stomach and a lot of the other quantum lessons that we've all started to learn, I think, over the last 24 to 36 months.
Yep. Wow. That's quite a journey, dude. It really, really is. So you touched on a point there, which I think is quite important. Well, 2 points, actually. First one is having to take health into your own hands. That basically is decentralized health. Like you becoming the CEO of you, basically, like being able to make those decisions with making informed decisions because you've taken the time to research it and not just take one myopic view that, okay, a doctor says X, so it must be. So you weren't getting better. So you then did your own research and found out from that there was other things going on, not just with the eardrum, but also with the probiotics. Because when you listen to a lot of podcasts, and we're not going to chuck any podcasts under the bus here, but a lot of people on podcasts will advertise certain companies with probiotics and stuff. And as a practitioner with my clients, the one thing I won't do unless it's 2 particular strains, I will never give them a probiotic unless we've done a gut test, unless we've done like a GI map or a gut zoomer or something like that, so that I understand what's there. It's a little bit like at the moment, there's a lot of push on Akkermansia, mucophilia, and okay, that's great because you need it in abundance. But if you've already got it in abundance and you're like, oh, I'll take that because it's going to make me feel better, and it's the lean promoting bacteria, well, all of a sudden you're going to have too much, and then you find yourself in the same situation that you were in. So I think they're 2 very, very important points where guessing is not the way to go. It really isn't. Just grabbing, particularly when it comes to bacteria, because we're more bacteria than we are human. There's more pathogens and bacteria and all of that stuff inside of us than there is human DNA. So we're actually symbiotic in nature in that regard. So we need to treat them well. And there needs to be that fine balance. It can't be all good and it can't be all bad. It has to be that nicely balanced seesaw. So I think you learned something quite valuable there.
I want to add one more layer to this. And this is, on one hand, this is where maybe some of the benefits of Western medicine are and where some of the pitfalls of decentralized health can lie. So one of the most, on the journey to becoming the CEO of myself, there was a little bit of this trial and error. And there are some risks in decentralized health, like trying something that doesn't work for you. But here's the thing. The direct experience of trying something that doesn't work for you, in a sense, is far superior to just being prevented from having that direct experience. Now, don't get me wrong. It really did suck to feel depressed for 3 to 6 months with really bad gut health and not really, knowing how to, speed up that process other than just to like get back to eating a healthy, for me, like now it's like throwing in more things like kimchi and ferments, like sauerkraut and things like that. But yeah, so just this learning lesson that when you put things in your own hands, you have this amazing freedom to trial and error. And I think it's actually only really a good thing. Like even the negative feedback is positive because it teaches you just as well, I think, as having a positive experience with something. 100%. And especially if you're on the pulse and you do get a negative reaction and you are on the journey to becoming the CEO of your own health, then you're going to be paying attention to these things. And you're going to, and I think that's actually, and one more thing to add to this is when you start trialing and erroring, you become a lot more sensitive to the inputs and the outputs, and you start paying attention to things. Yeah. And I think that's the other aspect of like a decentralized health awakening, is making you much more acutely aware of what your ins and outs are and what your relationship is to all the different things that you're doing. Because I think a natural default of a centralized system is to sort of root out the thinking. And then as a result of rooting out the thinking, we're rooting out the connection and the sensation. It also kind of doesn't help that centralized healthcare is largely focused on desensitizing people to their symptoms. Yep. In fact, that's actually a really important topic, I think, and it's like really well embraced by decentralized practitioners. This idea of like what Jack would say, which is like embrace the suck, but also like I'm seeing much more of a radical perspective around illness and sickness, like not like a chronic disease, but like an acute illness, which is this really strong calling that the answer is going to be in getting closer to nature as opposed to like closer to Tylenol or closer to any other types of things. And so this also, I guess that's a bit of a segue into the topic of the quantum and how I relate to it. And one more thing I briefly want to add, because it was something that came up in El Salvador. Maria was doing a documentary she was interviewing everybody, and she said, in one word, like, what does quantum mean to you? Yes. And I was just thinking about that because I don't relate to it in the same way that a lot of the participants at Solar Culture necessarily relate to it, or at least how they would describe it. I think how we relate to it is actually quite similar, but how I answered the question was, quantum to me is simply about stacking habits over a very long period of time. Like, seeing the sunrise every day, or, eating eggs every day. Although obviously there are also some potential risks of like overdoing certain proteins or things like this. You could create insensitivities if your immune system is in a rough shape, but that's a side point. The main point is really learning about this consistency component and the benefits of stacking consistency, which I think is something that a lot of people in contemporary society don't really want to embrace. They want to go out and stay up till midnight or later on the weekends, and they want to sleep in, and they feel constrained, and they don't get excited by this consistency. And that's actually been a newfound source of excitement and energy for me, which is sort of leaning into this neg-entropic reality, which is if you focus on your rest and recovery and the consistency of these habits, you're going to get a lot closer to aging in reverse, or at least slowing down the aging processes, which we mindfully often ignore, or mindlessly often ignore, pardon me.
I couldn't agree with you more, brother. And there are so many important points there that you've raised. So I say to my clients all the time, success in anything is just consistency over time. So you can't expect to come in with a supplement shotgun and shoot it every single day, 1 million supplements, and expect to feel better instantly. Somebody will take a supplement and say, I don't feel anything. Well, why would you? You take vitamin D, you're not going to feel it. You take zinc, you're not going to feel it. Like, why should you have to feel it? The only things that you're going to feel are things that alter brain chemistry, because you're actually going to feel the change. So I think that's a very important point of, just because you're not seeing a result within the first week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, doesn't mean that you stop growing. It doesn't mean that you stop doing it. If you planted a flower from a seed and it wasn't a full flower after 2 weeks, would you just throw it away?
No, but there's something else to add here, which is once you start tuning in to the changes you make and the inputs and the outputs, you actually start becoming a lot more sensitive, your system becomes more sensitive. Agreed. So things when you're starting, you're not going to really notice, but for anyone who's made any lifestyle change and started to notice those changes, like whatever they are, like a more recent one for me has been turning off the breaker in my bedroom and just having less EMF in my immediate surroundings, and noticing just small little things. And I think, I don't think I would have noticed these things 3 years ago. But the more you start dialing in, and this is actually another potential downside of the decentralized or the circadian health, which is you get so fine-tuned, so dialed in that one, you notice a lot more. But when you disrespect the system, you notice it a lot more. So one of the things you notice is that people who live a certain form of lifestyle, like the chronic cigarette smokers, they're actually really accustomed to this like high toxicity state, and they kind of thrive in it. And when you start cleaning up your diet, going to sleep early, one alcoholic beverage and 2 hours post your normal bedtime, you're going to start hitting a wall that you otherwise were like, when I was a little younger, I didn't hit those walls. And I've started to really embrace and really understand why there are benefits to stacking these good habits and really being okay with the sacrifice. But I do want to mention that this is probably the hardest thing for anybody in this space. When you start putting yourself first and making health-based choices, it starts to create social conflict, depending on how you can navigate that. And this is a really important topic because I think everyone's going to have different values around this. But for me, friends and family really, really matter. And the last thing I want in my health journey where I'm prioritizing my health is to make it to a point where I can't connect with those people anymore. And these things do happen naturally. Like you start to realize we don't have anything in common anymore. We're not really moved by the same things. And perhaps that's actually all good, but this is a bit of a conflict that I think we all have to navigate. And it does highlight another aspect, which is the importance of being well balanced and not necessarily being hyper rigorous. And maybe what I can really distill from this is the more I can lean into the quantum health and decentralized health practices, the more I can at least mindfully break the rules, which is to say, understand that there are consequences and at least have a roadmap back to where I want to be. Whereas what I see this is also important because I think when I walk this path with other friends or family, it gives me a point of commonality where I can share and almost share what I'm doing or explain, what quote unquote hacks or little tips I might have to sort of not make tomorrow so terrible, for example, because a lot of people around me don't fully intuit or feel out the quantum, because I'm not going to go out and express that I understand the quantum on a Richard Feynman level. I don't yet, but I think we can intuit it and express it in simpler ways that really do make sense. And that's been really powerful.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. And you've hit on a very, very important and poignant topic when it comes down to not just quantum biology, like implementing quantum biology practices into your life for the decentralized health perspective, but just any health practice. They say like in a social group of say like 5 people, everybody's got a role, whether that's family or friends, everybody's got a role. Someone's the funny one, someone's the rich one, someone's the organizer, blah, 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 blah. And everybody's role is defined. And then the second you change your role without letting everybody else know, all of a sudden you upset the apple cart. And now they're all kind of like, what's wrong with you? Why have you changed? And you haven't changed, you've just grown a little bit. And so your role is slightly altering. But then it's just about saying to them, okay, it's because I'm on this kind of journey right now. And it would be great if you could support that. I'm not trying to make you all do it, but you could support the fact that, I want to practice this and see where it goes and all the rest of it. Just let people know. I think that's a very important point. And at the same time, realizing that there's got to be an anti-fragility to a lot of what we do. If you are so tight to your habits that if you don't do that one thing, your whole day is off, well, that's not a good thing. Because now all of a sudden, if you can't do your red light for 20 minutes while you do your breath work at 6 a.m., well, that's going to mess you up. And that's now going to be a psychological stressor. That's going to be even worse. So we need to be anti-fragile. Like we've all gone to solar culture in El Salvador. Well, you've traveled from Canada. I've traveled from the United Kingdom. Now, from a quantum and decentralized health perspective, we both know getting on a plane is the worst thing that you could possibly do. But as you say, at the same time, we've got our tips, tricks, and hacks that we can put into place so that we mitigate or reduce as much of the negative effects as possible. There will still be negative effects because you're traveling time zones. At no point are you supposed to be doing that over a short period of time. time, you would have done it either by foot or by boat, which would have taken longer. So your body would have had time to adjust. But by flying and reducing that time period, we're now almost time jumping.
Yeah.
And our cells and our body clocks haven't got a clue what's going on. So there are practices that we can do which help those things. So as an example, if you're landing in another country, and the hours are different, whatever time of day that you land, get your bare feet on the ground as quickly as you can if possible, or touch a tree or something like that ground as soon as you possibly can. Because now that's given your body a signal of where you are in the world. So your body's now going to go, right, okay, so it could be dark when you land, but you're touching a tree. Okay, so I know that you're here and I know that it's dark, which means now is nighttime. So it allows you to still function in society without being a hobbit at home, because you have to be out by sunrise and in by sunset. Like, it just gives you that flexibility.
It also makes me feel like I had goosebumps hearing that, because on one hand, through the journey of like supplements and biohacking, like, I don't ever want to travel without my red blocking glasses, for example, 100%. And other things and even though I know, for example, Bluetooth noise canceling headphones are a tremendous source of non-native EMF, I also know the non-native EMF in the airplane is such that what I'm going to be introducing to my head, for example, is going to be not good. But for example, like the stress reduction benefits of noise canceling might be such that they cancel these things out. But what I would really want to mention is I feel this sense of almost like power, knowing all the different things that I know. And I don't feel attached to any one of the modalities anymore, because like, for example, flying home from El Salvador, I was with another solar culture participant, Maria, and we got out of the taxi. We had our blue blocking glasses on. It was 6 a.m. The sun was just coming up. Instead of going into the airport, we just went to the grass and just took our shoes off and put our feet on the grass. And so you go on this journey of like, expensive technology, different types of things, and they all are, there's a time and a place for a lot of them. But just understanding, like, put your feet on the grass before you get in the airplane. Go look out and see if you can see the sunrise. See the sunrise when you're on the plane, even though it's through a plastic window. All those little things start to sort of you're starting to unconsciously understand your circadian health in a way higher level. And there still are like other little benefits and little tricks, whether that's like homeopathic blends or, fasting or, high quality spring water. But this also reminds me of the rabbit hole of like, do I do molecular hydrogen or do I not do molecular hydrogen? Or is it really not going to be much of a difference either way? The reality is I just might need a couple pieces of fruit. And I'm going to have to just deal with the oxidative stress because I'm not going to be able to undo it. Yep. These are just the realities of the situation.
Yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. And I think that's a very important message that people need to hear about all of these things. So just so that the people that are listening, the people that are watching, circadian biology is interlinked with quantum biology. And circadian biology is just basically the way that our body keeps time. So it's how our body knows when to wake up and when to go to bed. It also tells our body when to release certain hormones, when to make certain hormones, when to release cortisol, when to stop making cortisol, when to make melatonin, when to release melatonin. It is critical to everything that we do. And if we don't have the right light signals and we don't have the right grounding signals, our body gets thrown off. And this has been proved many, many times. And all you've got to do is think about when they're doing studies where they want to see how do people function when they are sleep deprived? Well, they put them in rooms with really bright light. So if you're in a room with really bright light and it's nighttime, you are forcing your body to stay awake because you're telling it it's basically midday. So this is where the circadian biology thing comes in. And at the same time, all you've got to do is put somebody, there was a guy, I can't remember his name, and you might have listened to the same podcast as me. I think it might have been Jack Cruz, he mentioned it in one of his, where this guy went and lived in a cave for like a week or something like that. And he got no light signal whatsoever. And after the first like 3 or 4 days, he was fine. I think it was something like day 7 or day 8. All of a sudden he started losing his marbles. He didn't know what time of day it was. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know if he was sleeping or not. Like, he had no clue where he was in the world. That shows you how important these light signals are. And we are outdoor mammals living an indoor existence 90% of the time. So this is then where the light hacks and the biohacks come into play. So like blue blocking glasses, biohack. I've got a biolight in front of me, biohack. I've got a circadian bulb behind me and above me. Again, all biohacks, because I want to try and minimize the light damage that I'll get from doing a podcast at this time of night in the UK, because right now it's dark outside. So it's important to understand the circadian perspective. And And we're touching on three different topics here now, which all blend in together, which is the decentralized health, which is basically you being the CEO of you, learning and failing as you go, but basically having autonomy to make choices and not being told what you can and can't do. Then you've got the quantum biology side of things, which we're going to touch on now. Then you've got the circadian. So number one, what does quantum biology mean to you? And then two, how did you get into that side of health? Because it's a very, very new area. And I would say at least 98% of the population have no clue what it is. So
there's been different things. Well, I want to just talk about the heart probably.
Sure.
So quantum biology and so quantum entanglement, quantum is, again, it does mean a lot of different things. We can think about the slit and the particle and wave experiment, the slit experiment, like the particle and wave stuff. And learning about this, like one of the things I've been thinking about, and I kind of like almost writing song lyrics about it, is this idea of like the field and what is the quantum field. And I believe the quantum field is the field of love. And thinking about like social media and wanting to get likes, or so things like observing, like self-observation takes the quantum coherent wave and turns it into a classical particle, essentially. So learning about like this, like, why do I want to have like why do I want to get like likes on my Instagram posts? And as opposed to this idea of like just doing it. And so like I wrote another lyric or a tweet. It was like, don't look down, don't look back, something along these lines. And so what I'm sharing here is a very abstract level look into quantum topics. And again, I want to go back to this idea of the heart. So the heart is a really interesting thing. And it seems to me like there is a lot of different things. Like, so the heart relates to topics like scalar waves. And I'm actually thinking of a quote from one of Sarah's more recent podcasts where she said, the sun is the heart's best friend. And she was talking a lot about how the sun is actually producing scalar waves as well, and plasma. And so one of the things about quantum is, one, that everything is connected, but not in a linear way. Everything is connected in a much broader systems perspective. And one of the most powerful things that came from solar culture that I feel, and I don't know, but I feel, and like almost everybody felt this, was that we created a really strong sense of quantum entanglement
100%
through connecting on a heart-centric level. And this is like definitely a woo way to describe this, but there's actually no other way to describe it. You could say it's an emotional thing, but it's actually much more about the electromagnetic field that the heart produces and its quality. And then what happens, I think, when people who also have hearts, I mean, everybody has hearts, but when people start spending time in the same space, I think there's not only entrainment that occurs, but also there's going to be, there's so many different layers to look at this. Even we started studying and talking about the oral microbiome. And so is this quantum? It's hard to say if this is inherently a quantum topic, but it's definitely a new age of physics at the very least. So yeah, I'm getting a little bit lost on what is quantum. It's a lot of different things, but I think it comes down for me to this idea of like, what is the heart? What is the brain? And then how do the heart and the brain relate and connect to all things? And in looking at some of Dr. Sara Pugh's work and her research, where she's bringing in different papers and researchers, we're starting to put together a cosmology of physics and biology and spirituality that start to make a lot of other things make sense. So I appreciate that this type of answer may be a little disappointing for some insofar as it's not specific. But the thing about the quantum is that it's not really designed to explain specifics. It's, at least for me, it's designed to explain broad things. And it's really done wonders for putting things in a perspective and starting to explain some of the real juicy things that make life a lot more spicy. And that's actually one more thing I want to add. A really strong feeling from solar culture was we're all very passionate intellectual people, but we also, I think, strongly reject the atheist dogma that we see in the world. And instead we want to be embracing a bit more of the spiritual and find ways to make life more meaningful. And perhaps that's a bit of a reaction against the state of the world. But that's another aspect that I think is really powerful in the space of quantum biology and the researchers therein. What you start to see is that the higher level researchers, it's like there's like a bell curve for atheism, and like the atheists are squarely in the middle of the bell curve, and the higher up they go in terms of like level of focus, research, and analysis, the more they become a bit more open about their agnosticism at the very least. And maybe at most they start talking about things like we've been learning. I know you and I are both diving into Robert Temple's book, A New Science of Heaven, talking about plasma science. And is plasma science quantum? I have no clue how to answer that, but it sure seems really important.
Yep, I agree. I 100% agree. I personally believe it's all quantum. I think everything is quantum. I think if the way that I looked at it, and the reason why I asked that question is because I've been thinking about this quite a lot during my meditations or my medicine journeys that I do when I want to get in touch with that. And everything is quantum as far as I'm concerned. It's it's an ability to label the things that we can't label. Like, how do we know? Like, everybody knows this experience. You think about a friend and they call you within 5 minutes and you didn't even know they're going to call you. Or you're walking down the street and you're like, oh, I haven't seen so-and-so for a while, and boom, they walk around the corner. Well, that's quantum entanglement to some degree. So
yes. And let me add to that. So I often think about dreams where, like, I have a dream and I see somebody in my dream that I know. And the reality is that they don't know that I saw them in the dream, but I'm going to go tell them about it or something like this. But the reality is, I think quantum works in a way that whether or not that individual knows that we saw each other in the dream, that's probably not even relevant. Just the fact that that my human brain has some connection to them and their being in some way, and it's surfacing in a dream. It's not really important whether they're consciously aware of it at all. It's more important that it's unconsciously working on me. And again, it's just reinforcing that there is a connection. It doesn't necessarily need to be a conscious connection. And one more thing, which I was saying before, is that quantum doesn't survive observation. So, it's one of those really, it's like that science experiment. I'm trying to think of is it like just non-Newtonian physics where you make this like cornstarch goop and you like, when it's like not being touched, it's a solid. And then when you put it in your hands, it melts. It sort of feels like something along those lines. And I just want to go back to that idea of the more you observe it, the more you break it down and sort of destroy its true magical capacity.
Exactly.
And I guess what that brings me to actually is this topic of faith, which is sort of knowing it's there, but not needing to check in on it as much. And I think that's an important lesson and something that I've been working on, whether that's related to like self-esteem or like, is my music good, or does this girl like me? I need to stop bringing those questions to the forefront and have a little bit of faith. Because again, I think the act of observation is actually breaking down that field, which I described earlier as like a field of love.
Agreed, 100%. So basically what you're describing there, if you're looking at it from a woo-woo spiritual perspective, would be the path of least resistance, which would be the path of manifestation, where basically once you put it out into the ether, you just leave it there. You don't have to keep asking. The universe only needs to be asked once. A little bit like your mum or your dad when you ask them if you can have a toy when you're a kid. You only need to ask them once. But you'll keep asking them until they give you an answer. And then eventually the answer is going to be no, because you're pissing them off. So it's like you only have to put it out there the one time. So I do want to circle back onto something just quickly though. How did you discover quantum biology? How did you get into the decentralized health quantum field?
Like really specifically?
Just did you stumble across a podcast, or was there something going on you needed to have an answer to?
Well, I haven't thought about it, but one thing that comes up is I would listen to the Ben Greenfield fitness podcast, and then I
So
also
do I.
listen to the Luke Story lifestylist
Yes.
podcast.
Yep.
And
So do I.
Jack Cruz made appearances on both of those podcasts.
He did.
But I don't think I actually understand. Here's the thing. Did I understand the quantum back then, or did I just think blue blocking glasses might be useful or red light might be useful?
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I just thought those things were useful. But I think that's maybe the first place. But I also think the quantum makes it, I think there was probably always an affinity because I was always thinking about that story I told about the truth keychain. So I think I was always sort of I've always loved music and things like so. And when I learned about alchemical principles like the law of resonance or things like this, or harmonics, maybe even just gaining a tertiary understanding of blue blocking glasses is what created the magnetism for me to follow quantum teachings later down the road. I don't really have a clue about that. But I'm starting to also think a lot about, and this is a pretty out there topic, but I've been doing a lot of songwriting and looking at lyrics and chatting with a few friends and sharing lyrics back and forth. And we've been talking about these ideas like the higher self and like you guiding yourself over time and it's looking at some of the older lyrics that I wrote that made less sense then and looking at them now like they make more sense. Maybe that's also a bit of a quantum thing, sort of having a little bit of faith and not questioning things and just sort of doing them. And sometimes we get the benefit of looking back and go, wow, that actually did make sense. Or like now it's useful. Now it makes sense. And related ideas, I just shared a song idea with somebody about roses in June randomly. And this person also had a song lyric. They're like, oh, that's so funny. You had a song lyric like that. Like I had something like that too. And, I think maybe that lyric was probably just sitting on an iPhone and maybe never to be thought about ever again. So I don't know, maybe I'm just a magical monkey brain making lots of connections. Or maybe it's quantum, stuff and the higher self and, revealing things to you in due time.
Yep, agreed. So there's a author who, what's her name? Elizabeth Gilbert. She's best known for her Eat, Pray, Love, the one that Julia Roberts shot the film for. But she wrote a very good book called Big Magic. And in that book, she hypothesizes that, and this is where the quantum, the ether, the I don't know what else you want to call it, like the universe, whatever, like the Akashic records.
Sarah called it like the big system or the big brain.
Yeah.
There's like the little brain and the big brain or something.
Exactly. So the Akashic records is what it's known as in other spiritual kind of realms. That basically when an idea, there's all the ideas are up in the Akashic records and they choose who to come down to. So if we use your lyrics as an example, right? This song idea came to you and it also came to somebody else. Who runs with that idea is the one who actions it first. Mm-hmm. So you both had the idea, you've actioned it, and then you've linked it to this friend of yours and gone, oh, by the way, what do you think of this? And they've gone, oh, funny enough, I just happened to write a lyric like that here. They've not actioned it, you have. So now you can see how this big magic Akashic record thing can work. A little bit like how Charles Darwin wasn't the only one who came up with the theory of evolution, right? Mm-hmm. There was somebody else before him. But the person before him, whose name escapes me right now, didn't publish it in time. No, not Einstein, Darwin, sorry. Did I say Darwin or Einstein?
I don't know. Sorry.
I can't remember. Anyway, let's use Darwin because that's who I was going with. Theory of evolution, he publishes it. This other guy comes up with the idea and doesn't. Both came up with it at the same time.
Yeah.
This is quantum. This is ether. This is Akashic records. This is like why anytime you get an idea which you think is worth its salt, do something with it, because if you don't, somebody else will. And everybody knows that thing where they'll see it on TV or they'll see it on Instagram or they'll see it on something else going, oh, I had that idea 10 years ago. But then why didn't you do anything about it? Because somebody else now had that same idea. So
this is actually another one of the benefits of circadian biology and the quantum, I think. So like, for example, in El Salvador, like the first thing we all did is like we go to the beach and we just stare at the sunrise. And like, you can sort of make fun of it, like, it's like everyone's getting their downloads. But I think this actually, and you see this in Jack Cruz's writing, like Jack Cruz will hit us with like the most motivational speeches of all time. And I think when you start connecting more to nature and like the broader world, but also your own internal world, you're more primed to receive, and you have more, we get more specific, more energy or mitochondrial resources to actually facilitate the creative process. Another thing that's related to this too is, on one hand, our creatives in contemporary society are light abusing, drug abusing, people who have terrible sleep hygiene. Mm-hmm. And they get a superpower from basically degrading their melanin and turning it into dopamine. Yep. And I think on the flip side of that, when we become more anti-fragile and lock in circadian and quantum health practices, like what I've noticed is like my creativity this year and since coming back from El Salvador is ridiculous. Like producing a lot more music. I was joking to myself that like, I wonder if methylene blue is just making me smarter, which might also be partially the case. Yeah. But I also feel like these like waves of energy come and go as well. Like you said, like it's very important to sort of surf the wave. That's actually a great life metaphor. I went surfing for the first time in El Salvador, and there's a lot of important metaphors that can be taken from the idea of like, you got a wave coming up and you got either going to surf it or you're going to crash in it. Yep. And being ready to surf the waves, which is, like understanding the vibrations of the ocean, seeing them, the timing, being in sync with your breathing, all those different things in a surfing metaphor, I think relate perfectly to broader life topics, like whether that's like receiving a creative idea or bringing something else into the world. Yeah.
Love it, dude. Love it. So going back to the habits of quantum, the circadian body side of things. So the sunrise, the UVA, the grounding, the light exposure, all that type of stuff. For the general population out there who aren't as versed in it as you are, who aren't working in it like I am as a practitioner, if you could give them 1 to 3 things that you do every day, because again, people always give excuses. Oh, I can't go and see the sunrise because of X. Oh, I can't go and do the UVA because of B. Whatever. What would be some easy, applicable circadian quantum habits that you would suggest to people to try and just build, as you say, stack those habits up every single day for consistency?
Okay, so the first one I think is turning your day into a pie chart and mapping out the ratio of inside time to outside time. So, like you said, obviously getting your morning sun and your noon sun and your sunset, those are all really, really important, vital times. But if you can think a little bit differently and go, okay, the reality is I spend 99, let's say I spend 95% of my time inside. I'm at my desk for 8 hours a day. I'm going to be I'm going to be watching television after dinner, etc. You got to start. So one is start thinking about the ratio, and any dent at all you can make in that ratio of inside time to outside time, assuming it's not like at 11 p.m. at Times Square in New York, it's going to be a step in the right direction. So, but as well, I'll also say, like, you don't necessarily need to go straight into sun gazing. You just need to get your eyes on the sky and start to take in those rich blue gradients. And so that's a great starting point. And then let me add another layer that people don't often think about, especially if they get caught up in Jack Cruz teachings, because Jack Cruz will say food is not as important as light, but he actually, and I'm not trying to make sure, I want to be clear that I understand his teaching about food. And food is ultimately also a light barcode.
Yep.
So trying to eat more seasonally and locally informed is going to also have a big difference. Think about the things that you eat. So like whether that's like milk or eggs or cheese, these are all made through circadian processes and quantum informed processes. Again, like if you're going to have a healthy cow or produce milk, it's going to be outside. It's going to be getting light. It's going to be eating and breaking down grasses, which are also made of light. And it's going to be producing bacterias from light as well. And so focusing on what types of foods you're going to be eating, both on where they're grown. But there's another layer here that you could also start thinking of. And I don't want to make this too complicated. So I'll make it simple, but this is the deuterium topic. Mm-hmm. So, and I actually, this is actually through Paul Chek's teaching of the primal typing diet, which is that if you have ancestry that comes from a place that freezes in the winter time, you should be eating more foods that have eyeballs. And so what that told me, and I've known this for quite a while, that I personally thrive on a high fat, high protein diet. Mm-hmm. Always have, and always sort of felt that. But I've felt it and really internalized it a lot more once I started understanding some of the other health and quantum health topics. So when it comes to deuterium, how does this relate to high fat and high protein? Well, what we can learn about is, so for example, eggs and fruit and meat have natural processes to sort of select out deuterium. So for example, egg yolks are lower in deuterium than the whites. Mm-hmm. And you can start, or also like whole fat milk is going to be a lot better than skim milk for its deuterium. There's other things like having like a high quality spring water from an Arctic source or things like this. But that gets way too into the weeds. The main thing is, I think, depending on where you live in the world and what your ancestry looks like, is eating the right balance of fats to carbohydrates to proteins. And also, this is another quantum lesson, is trying to stack your eating in the right circadian window. So really leaning into meal cutoff times. So like I used to eat, like at 7 o'clock, and now I'm eating at like 5:30. And this is also dependent on and a tough reality is like daylight saving. So like it's like 5 p.m. and it's already dark. Yeah. And that's not really going to work for me, but 5:30 will, or 5:45 will. So those are two things, which is selecting the right food types, like high fat, high protein, lower carbohydrate diets. Making sure they're sourced locally and circadian informed as much as possible. And again, I do want to highlight that once you start grounding yourself with these types of practices, and because these foods and contain good information, that I don't know if this is technically a Zeitgeber or if it's just like another type of term that helps regulate your circadian health. But these are really good foundational principles, and they will allow you to break more rules as well. Not that we want to break rules, but for example, like I really wanted to make an agua tamarindo when I came back from El Salvador, and have some lime juice and some tamarind juice, which I shouldn't be having in Canada. Obviously, I shouldn't be having those in Canada, especially not in the summertime. But this is also, striking the balance between grounding yourself with good practices and then doing things that also kind of light your heart up a little bit.
Exactly.
And I found that once I'm grounded with the right behaviors, you can sort of find that spark. You're not going to be partying like you used to, assuming you partied a lot in your 20s or your teens. But you're going to find the things that spark joy. And one more thing I also want to mention that is like so important here is I don't know how this relates to the quantum. Maybe it's more of a spiritual topic, but it's really important that like these habits allow you to maintain a high level of youthfulness and happiness and playfulness. And I know you would also appreciate this because you've got a strong grounded knowledge of shamanism. But I think that's another aspect that I think neg-entropic elements of quantum biology are actually helping us regain a youthful vigor. And I think that's actually so important, because if I think about like what is society missing, well, I think most of it is driven by materialism and reductionism, and it's robbing us of our childlike joy, whether that's, feeling the need to earn X amount of money per year, or social stigmas or mores or things like this. I don't know why I feel compelled to share that, but this idea of being playful and youthful, maybe it's because you can't really be playful and youthful without being well rested.
Yep.
And you can't really be well rested without really understanding and honoring quantum principles.
Yep. I totally agree with you. I've got a book over on my shelf somewhere called Play. Yeah, it's right there, written by a psychologist who said that play is a thing that we're missing in our adult life because of the fact that it's been drummed out of us, and it's a thing that we should be doing. And from the shamanistic perspective, they have 4 questions that they ask. So if you were in a shamanic tribe and you were not feeling, it's very rare that you would be feeling yourself, but you went to your shaman because you weren't feeling well or something, they would ask you 4 questions. When was the last time you sang? When was the last time you danced? When was the last time you told a story? And when was the last time you sat in stillness? So stillness is obviously going to connect you with yourself and let the murky mind settle. Telling a story is how we're going to communicate with the world. And it's what we're doing right now because we all love a story around a campfire. When was the last time you danced? Well, watch a child dance. They dance like no one's watching and they don't care because it's a full embodiment. And then when was the last time you sang? Well, that's vibration, right? That is pure frequency. That is pure quantum. Sing like no one's listening. That way then you are going to release whatever vibration is stored within your body. Whenever I do a mantra or something like that, or in the morning if I'm doing like ohms or something like that, the tonality of the om changes every day based on what frequency my body needs. So if my body needs a higher bass frequency, my om is higher. If it needs a more lower based, more dantian, stomach based kind of frequency, it will be lower. So these things are important. Play is important, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the quantum aspect puts us back in touch with those things because we're back in nature. And when you're in nature and you haven't got your phone, you're not distracted, you're not doing anything like that. Like when I go out and see the sunrise in the morning and I'm in nature by myself, my phone's in my bag, and I take it out to take that picture, but then I put it away. Then I stay there to do the sun. And when I'm there, silence speaks and stillness listens. So I'm still, so I'm there listening, and silence then starts to speak. And I'll start getting downloads that morning about how I'm feeling, what I'm going to do, where I'm going to go, potential opportunities, creative ideas. So I totally 100% agree with you.
I want to add one more layer and one more word to this conversation about quantum, which is the word coherence.
Yes.
And so and I'm thinking about the surfing metaphor again, which is this idea of like going with the flow and like not being in a state of resistance. And I think chanting, oming, dancing, just being well rested, or being able to tell your story, I think all of these are about creating a state of coherence. And when I think about coherence, I'm thinking about our cells operating in harmony, our brain and our heart and our brain waves, sort of all kind of going with the flow. And we're not necessarily, I think also like mindfulness practices, like body scans, are actually almost designed to identify states of decoherence and sort of wash them over. But yeah, when I think about like oming, I also was thinking about like a bath protocol. I wrote it on Twitter, and it was also inspired by some of the solar culture people who also love bathing. So like putting in a 2 drops of methylene blue, putting in some cream, putting in some honey, putting in some essential oil drops. But when I was analyzing it, so the first thing is a warm bath makes the water temperature around the same temperature as your heart and your body. So the first thing you're doing is creating a little bit of a state of coherence between your body and the container that you're in. And then you mentioned this idea of oming, or, and I know about the benefits of humming through, on Paul Chek, he interviewed a guy named Jonathan Goldman, who's a sound healer, and just talking about the benefits of humming for nasal nitric oxide production. but in a bath where, let's say we put on some binaural beats that are hitting a fadeaway, for example, and we start oming or humming. I don't know if this is true, but it feels to me like we're creating an increased sense of physiological coherence by, entraining our brain, by creating the vibrations through our chest. Like, I think you've probably seen those images of like a frog doing a mating call in the water, and when you see it happen, like you see the vibrations sort of emanating outward from the frog. I sort of imagine the same thing in a bathtub when you're oming and listening to
100%.
calming music. And I think this idea of coherence is really important because it breaks down. Coherence is inherently quantum, and it explains relationships between things at a distance based on their resonant frequencies.
Yep.
And the more coherent we get with ourselves, the more we're going to find resonance with other things and connect to those things. But further, like you said about this idea of songs coming to you, well, what's going to make you a more magnetic or attractive force to a song? Probably your state of resonance. And we could also correlate this with I'm forgetting the name of the graphic, but basically the difference, each emotion has a different energetic frequency.
It does.
And there are like negative emotional frequencies and positive emotional frequencies. And like among the highest emotional frequencies are, for example, like a state of gratitude. It's among the highest emotional frequencies. And from a certain perspective, makes a lot of sense how if somebody's quote unquote vibrating in a state of gratitude, that they are going to start resonating with certain ideas that are also of this higher quality. So I guess it sort of highlights that you get what you give, so to speak, and also explains like why people in a rough state sort of attract the things that they're fearing instead of the things that they truly want, because they don't mindfully understand this idea of manifestation. And it also highlights one more thing I do want to mention, which is a 2025 like trend or change that I want to see. And I'm trying to embody it. And I think a lot of us in solar culture are also doing this. So we've all come out of the greatest blessing of our lives, which was COVID, which we thought was the biggest curse of our lives, but it actually turned into the biggest blessing. So we've all were like, and for example, I'm sure Britain has passed some tyrannical BS law the last 3 weeks. I'm sure they've already done some crazy stuff.
Oh, Keir Starmer loves it, mate. He loves it.
Yeah. So and the reality is, so like where I'm from in Ontario, Canada, we had some of the harshest lockdowns, and it was so easy to just hate these mask-wearing, vaccine-loving psychopaths. It was the easiest thing in the world to just detest them and fixate on them. And the reality was, I realized I was just manifesting my own misery. And reinforcing my own misery by casting my own spells. Saying like, you're evil, or this is horrible, blah, 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 blah. And so in 2025, the vision is we don't black pill anymore. We don't even red pill. It's not important. All we do is we white pill, if we're going to use this metaphor, which is we're going to talk about the positive things we want to see. And we're only going to show and build beautiful things. And I think that's a really important, and maybe that really is a quantum thing as well. Realizing that we're responsible for what we create in the world. And I found myself like, there were these, popular accounts on social media that are like, the government is corrupt.exe. And like, all they talk about is like, Canada is a failed state and we're screwed. And now all I have to say to those people is like, shut the fuck up, doomer. Delete your account. Like, what are you doing here? They're like, oh, Yuri Bezmenov was right. I'm like, yeah, but you're creating the alchemy that's bringing this negativity into the world, and you're not making anything beautiful. So
exactly.
Anyways,
No, dude, I 100% agree with you. What you aim at determines what you see. And what you're summing up there or talking about there is what Buddha always spoke about, which was when what you wish for and what you live through don't match, that's suffering. Simple as that. So when the ideas of what you have and what you want for your life aren't actually manifested, and you're living a different life completely, that's suffering, because there's a complete disjointedness going on there. So on that note, coherence. For the people at home listening, watching, there is a very simple way that you can practice coherence through breath. It's been studied. The amount of studies they've done with this is unbelievable. I've got the device here. It's by HeartMath. You probably know who HeartMath are. You can search them online. You can find their YouTube videos and they'll teach you how to do it. But basically 5 to 6 seconds nasal inhalation in, 5 to 6 seconds nasal exhalation out. And you visualize while you're breathing that you're breathing in through your heart and you're breathing out through your heart. Once you can get that and you can feel it, then start thinking about things that you're grateful for. What this does is it creates coherence in your body where your brain, your heart, and your whole body come into alignment. And they all start working in tandem together again. There's no disjointedness. There's no like, this one's asleep and that's awake and that's supposed to be doing this and it's doing that instead. It all comes into alignment.
Would you say mantras also create coherence?
100%. So the easiest one to start with would be Om. And Om, as they say in Buddhism, is the sound of the universe. But if you go from a more pranayama approach, the way it's said, R is the first part of Om. So you would say R.
Right.
That's Brahma. And that vibrates down in the lower, in Tai Chi or Qigong would be the Dantian.
Yes.
That's where the main energy is stored. Then you've got the U. That's the heart center. So that's the bridge between the lower and the upper. And then you've got, and that's U is Vishnu. And then you've got which is Shivam or Shiva.
Right.
And that's the throat. So what you're doing is you're bridging lower, middle, and upper together just by chanting and you feel the different vibration points as you go through those changes. So that would be another one to do, because again, it is going to bring you into a coherent state 100%. So
I want to briefly mention that the lower Dantian teachings and the Taoist principles also affected me earlier on, before I think I even knew about the quantum. Just learning about the lower Dantian and the microcosmic orbit.
Yep.
Which is maybe a good thing just to share with the audience, the benefit of understanding the microcosmic orbit.
Please do.
So the microcosmic orbit is essentially, now I'm going to misspeak, but I want to say it's like a meridian, but I don't think it's a meridian. It's basically an electrical pathway that starts at the roof of your palate.
Yep.
Starts here, it goes up through your head, all the way back down your spine, and ends at your anus. And when you have your mouth closed and you have the tongue at the roof of your mouth, you are connecting and closing this circuit, essentially. And when I learned that just by putting the tongue to your roof of your mouth and that you are closing this circuit, as opposed to breathing with your mouth open, and how the energy and chi in your body is circulated, this is also associated with this metaphor or a visual image of basically the hydrology cycle of your body producing steam, it condensing into clouds, it raining, and then basically like that is the microcosmic orbit in your body being visualized as the hydrology cycle. But that learning, and then also just learning about the lower Dantian and its critical importance, which also is often correlated with the root chakra.
Yep.
That is a fundamental place to focus on for healing, because obviously as well, the root chakra has a lot to do with safety. But the other layer to this, and again, I have a strong passion for music and music production, and I think I've been spared being taken advantage of by the music industry. But for example, the knowledge of the root chakra and, for example, heavy bass music or like 808 music, like Kanye West went on a rant one day and he started talking about how music producers take advantage of certain frequencies to work on the root chakra, and they can affect people in this way. And the root chakra again is, it's right at the base of your perineum, and it's really important. Like if you understand what the Taoists are teaching, they talk about the importance of keeping that area strong and like part of your breathing, and it sort of struck me early on that a lack of knowledge in this space is one of the ways that people are spiritually attacked in ways they don't even understand. So yeah, like I remember years and years ago being like, okay, mouth is going closed, and now I understand this, and it's important to sort of guard your energy. But I want to also introduce another woo topic, which is essentially like portals. So the lower dantian is a portal, and it needs to be protected because the lower energies connect to lower level entities or thought forms or other forms of spiritual attachment. So it's very important to protect your energy, and I just wanted to highlight that because I think I picked up what was it from? So Montauk Chia was probably also a Ben Greenfield guest.
Yeah, love Montauk Chia.
Yeah, he wrote that book, was The Multi-Orgasmic
Man. It's a great book.
Yeah, no, I think most of the teachings that I was just referencing probably come from that book. Yeah. But I sort of drew some connections more into like rap music and live concerts and like what they're really doing when they hit you with that 808 bass, and how that actually relates to the lower dantian as well. Yeah.
It just all circles back to what Nikola Tesla said, which is when you understand the universe, you understand everything is vibrations and frequencies, right? So the music in our society has been deliberately detuned, so to speak. The frequencies have been changed so that they elicit certain responses in the body compared to if you listen to ancient culture music. This is why whenever you're on your spiritual path, you'll be drawn to a particular cultures of music. So whether that be Tibetan, Eastern of that nature, or Indian or something like that, or Persian or something, it's because they have certain frequencies, or African, they have certain frequencies and vibrations which are all missing from our music. And that's obviously no disrespect to your music production, because I know it's what you do, but that's why things like solfeggio frequencies are so important, because they work on a cellular and probably even deeper level, on a quantum level. And the more we can surround ourselves with those frequencies, the more harmonious and centered we're going to feel.
That gets back to the point of coherence. But I do want to highlight something you said, which is, so I agree, like, for example, A440 is a quantized tuning, concert tuning, and like A432, or also A444, which is also known as the key of David. Also, if I'm recalling correctly, Robert Edward Grant has done some research into perfect tunings, and A432 is actually not as good as A432.1. This is a small little point there. But what I was going to say is, when you talked about the ohm, and so the reality is, if you become more mindful, is that the words have the vibratory power in them anyways. So I do agree that, like, if we're going to produce a meditative song at A440, there could be a coherence issue with like certain ohms, but I mean, we're going to resonate our instruments with that tuning. But the main point there is just the right words contain the right frequencies in a certain sense.
Yes, they do.
But I do also see this point of there's going to be a lack of coherence if, for an A440 or A432. And I've actually been thinking and feeling into this topic a bit more. At one point, I felt fairly strongly that all music and concerts and things like this should all be in A432. I still think normatively that is probably the case. But at least from a recent experiential perspective, I have found that it's not as important as the songs containing the right words.
Yes.
But I'm not saying the frequency is not important. Of course it is.
Of course it is.
You know what, though? Another while I'm just on this topic.
Please go ahead.
We live in a 440 world. We live in a quantized reality. So here's another challenge of introducing these healing frequencies, is that they might help normalize you in a isolated space and get you back to like a more optimal state of coherence. But what is the effect of living in this world, our 60 hertz world or your 50 hertz world? Because, by the way, we have different electrical systems.
We do. You have 60, we have 50.
And our television frame rates are different.
Yep.
What is the effect of introducing these quote unquote better harmonies? But the reality is that the world is still quantized and electrified in a different sense. So is that not also potentially creating a lack of harmony? I'm not saying it is. We live in a very disconnected world, and
we do.
It's like sometimes in the effort to try to fix it, we might introduce more incoherence.
Agreed. Because the body works off signals for most of the part. That's what it's looking for. And a lot of the time, all it has is noise, because we just chuck too many things at it in one go. And what it's really hunting for is that signal. So if you're in a room and you've got one TV, well, you can hear what it's saying and you can watch it. But if you're in a room with 1,000 TVs, they're all turned up to maximum volume and they're all showing a different TV show. And then I said to you, Julian, right, pick out TV number 32 and tell me what's going on. You're not going to know. And that's what's happening in our world. Our body is incoherent because of that. It's not balanced enough. And I do think allowing ourselves to have moments of coherence is important, because you'll get that again if you go into like nature and you've got nothing else around you. You're going to instantly be in a state of coherence because you've got the natural vibrations and frequencies and sounds that our brain is searching for. So this is why it's important when you go into the woods or you go for a walk in a park or something like that, take your headphones out. Listen to the noises going on around you. Look distantly, look close, look to the side, do all the EMDR stuff. Like, it's important to have that level of coherence so that we can feel more settled.
Beautiful. That also makes me think about when you said take the earbuds out, which is one of my favorite things to think about because I see it everywhere. But one thing I learned from Jack Kruse is that every sensory organ where information goes in or out is filled with melanin.
Yep.
And so all the areas that are filled with melanin, there's going to be a classical physics understanding, but there's this next level of physics that Jack Kruse is studying and we're talking about that is way beyond our understanding. And so like it made me think about this idea, like the ears are a portal, the nostrils are a portal, the eyes are a portal. Every hole in our body is a portal. And I don't necessarily mean to like the Andromeda galaxy or something like that. But,
could you imagine?
Maybe,
could be.
At the very least, we're really hitting on this important idea of coherence. And one more thing that Sara Pugh talks a lot about, and so we often talk about grounding in nature, but what Sara was saying, which is actually I actually think this is more important, and for some reason we always glance over it, but Sara points it out, she said, like, don't worry about like taking your feet off. If you just go out in nature, you're in the Earth's electromagnetic field, which is not the same as grounding. It's a totally separate thing. And like just the more time we spend in those fields, the more we start to normalize our biology and create entrain the right rhythms and create coherence or entrainment. I also just want to briefly mention that, like, I think I discovered binaural beats and brain entrainment long before I understood the idea of coherence.
I did as well.
I remember you and I both were riffing on like our love of like solfeggio harmonies and like things like this. Alpha waves and different. And I guess one of the beautiful parts of this era that we're in now is we're able to reflect on so looking back, there's been lots of different fads or trends in health and biohacking. And now we're starting to see a bigger picture. We're starting to have tools with which to sort of say, that's coherence, that's entrainment. They're all kind of doing similar things. And we're understanding it from a bigger systems perspective. Whereas I feel like up until now, and maybe this is how the world is becoming more decentralized, is in the past, it was much more centralized. And so we were just getting bits and pieces, and those bits and pieces weren't really talking to each other. But through podcasting, through networking, through decentralized biohacking, aka becoming the CEO in our lives, we're starting to not only experience but have real tools with which to connect those dots.
Yep, agreed. Wow, brother, we have covered an immense amount of ground in 1 hour and 21 minutes. So I'm gonna call it there because we could keep riffing forever. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna suggest that we get you back on for round number 2, and we can start going down a little bit deeper in these rabbit holes. There are some things that we mentioned in this podcast today which people may have not heard of before. I will link as much as I can in the show notes below, particularly about coherence, deuterium, where they can find out a little bit more about quantum. I'll link up all the stuff that we've spoken about. When it comes to how they can find you, sir, as you say, you do media production consulting. So if people are interested in that side of things, or they just want to follow you because they love your tone, they love what you're saying, and they love your vibration, where can they find you?
So you can find me on X at Sonic Life Media, and you can find me on Instagram at jfrankmusic. And if you want to check me out and listen to more of my music as well, you can go to frank.bandcamp.com. And as well, I just want to make a brief plug for Sara Pugh's new podcast called It's called the Quantum Based Podcast. And it's a really important series. And so we talked about Sara earlier. The reason why I think it's important to share here is the first 7 episodes of this new series that we're working on together, re-releasing some of the important episodes. The first 7 are called the Quantum Basics series. And it's Sara who is going through her most important interviews and really distilling the key foundational elements of what is quantum based. So that's a really, really great place to start. Mm-hmm. And I also want to highlight that Sara's focus, while she is, a PhD level thinker, her mission with the podcast and her work is to bring this to ordinary people and to demystify it. So that's another great place. But as well, I'm definitely happy to be, a consultant on media-related topics and support you if you have a podcast or things like this. But overall, I think the Quantum-Based Podcast is a great starting place if you want to dive down the rabbit hole. And I really do recommend Sara's rabbit hole over many, many others because Mark and I both have been down many a rabbit hole and we have seen much. And we haven't, and I sort of speak for you, Mark, but I don't think we've seen somebody like Sara bringing in all of the different perspectives in a way that is truly groundbreaking. So go check that out.
I agree with you 100%. And what I'll do, I'm part of Sara's mentor group anyway. So what I'll do is I'll pop a podcast link into the show notes below as well as I'll share her YouTube channel because that's a wealth of knowledge too. Julian, brother, thank you. Oh, and I will also put the notes for what solar culture is below as well, because that's where we met. And then you can find all about solar culture.
Okay, a big shout out to Kiera and Michaela for solar culture. They're amazing.
Guys, thank you so much for creating solar culture. If you hadn't, this podcast wouldn't be born. I would never have met Julian. I would never have met any of the people that are about to come onto this show. So a massive thank you to Kiera and Michaela for setting it up. And Julian, brother, thank you so much for your time, for your knowledge, for your journey that you've taken us through. Really do appreciate it. And until next time, guys, stay blessed, stay well.
Thank you, Mark.